For several days now, the second phase of the war has been underway in Ukraine. The Russian army is making every effort to occupy Donetsk and Lugansk regions. But the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting back with dignity. Attempts to encircle the Ukrainian army remain unsuccessful. Russia suffers huge losses of both soldiers and equipment. According to British intelligence, the first weeks of the war have greatly weakened the Russian army. Huge losses have forced the Russians to send damaged equipment to the rear to be repaired. Stocks of equipment are rapidly running out, and production of new equipment is time-consuming and expensive, and extremely difficult under sanctions because of the shortage of imported parts. The Security Service of Ukraine has found a warehouse with $200 million worth of ammunition and spare parts for military equipment in the Kharkov region. This equipment was intended for repairing Russian equipment and replenishing ammunition. Thus, the Russian Federation was preparing in advance to use the city as a transit base for a further attack on the territory of Ukraine. Fortunately, Russians' plans didn't come to fruition. Now everything found has been handed over to the military forces of Ukraine and will be used to defend Ukraine. The Russian Federation officially named the goals of the second phase of the war as control of the Donbass, creation of a land corridor to Crimea, control of the south of Ukraine, and access to Prednistrovye. On April 20, Russian troops disguised in Ukrainian uniforms attempted to seize the village of Dolgenskoye in the Kharkov region, but failed. According to the General Staff, the enemy suffered casualties and was forced to retreat. It's worth adding that disguising oneself in the enemy's uniform during war is a violation of the Hague Convention and is considered a war crime. Another crime by Russian troops, which will certainly be used against them in a court of law. The Russian army continues its regular shelling of Kharkov and nearby population centers, causing even more destruction of the city and casualties among the civilian population. One such attack took place on the territory of the Cemetery of the Victims of Totalitarianism, where 4,302 Polish officers and civilians, 2,000 Ukrainians and Jews are buried. They were all shot by the NKVD and buried there. Russian troops shelled the village of Udi in the Zolochevsky district of the Kharkov region, which is in a border area with Russia, damaging and destroying the homes of the local population. Russian troops shelled the Lugansk region 11 times during the day. In Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Popasna, Rubizhnoye and Gorny, 7 residential buildings were partially damaged and 4 people were injured. During the fighting in the Lugansk region, fighters from Syria and Lebanon, who were on the side of Russia, were found and liquidated, stated the Secretary of National Security of Ukraine. As a reminder, due to the huge losses, the Russian army is forced to attract mercenaries from other countries to its sides. On the South Bush direction, Russian troops continued to shell Ukrainian military positions. The Russian military tried to conduct reconnaissance near Trudolubovka and suffered losses and withdrew to previously occupied positions, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. For several days now, the Russian army has not stopped shelling the Azovstal plant, where about 1,000 civilians and 500 wounded soldiers are hiding. The Russian Federation refused to provide humanitarian corridors and drops heavy air bombs on the territory of the plant. Azov fighters continue to resist, preventing the Russian army from taking the last stronghold. Meanwhile, Putin has already been informed about the seizure of Mariupol, but has also admitted that there are still resistance forces on Azovstal's territory. In response, the Russian president personally ordered that the territory of the plant be surrounded so that no one could enter or leave. British intelligence believes that by this decision Putin wants to keep and deploy troops elsewhere in eastern Ukraine. While storming Azovstal would result in heavy casualties for the Russians, further reducing their overall combat effectiveness. Azov fighters destroyed a V-marked tank in Mariupol. These were the attacks on the Russians' military who committed atrocities in Bucha, killing, raping and torturing civilians. This means that the Russian Federation moved troops from the Kiev direction to the east of Ukraine. Mariupol city authorities report that a mass grave was found where the Russian army hid the bodies of murdered civilians in order to hide traces of crimes. Satellite images made it possible to count about 200 new graves. Ukraine continues to receive weapons from all over the world. The Netherlands will soon supply Ukraine with PZH-2000 howitzers and Germany with ammunition for them, Bloomberg reported. Also, the German military will train the Ukrainians. In addition, 18 howitzers from the United States will be sent to Ukraine very soon, the Pentagon said. In turn, Ukrainian troops are actively demonstrating success in handling anti-aircraft weapons. In just one day, on April 21st, they managed to destroy 15 aerial targets, 9 of which were drones, 3 aircraft and 3 helicopters. Another Orlan-10 drone was captured by the Ukrainian army as a trophy. The Orlan-10 is used by Russian troops for reconnaissance. Partisan warfare is gaining momentum in the occupied territories of Ukraine. More and more Russian terrorists are being killed by unknown heroes over Ukraine. In Melitopol, partisans have already killed about 100 occupants. This was told by the mayor of the city, Ivan Fyodorov, in a TV marathon. And in Kherson, warning for occupants and collaborators appear on poles on which partisans warn that they are already at work and that death awaits all enemies of Ukraine. The Russian army continues to terrorize and take captive Ukrainian civilians. During a humanitarian corridor in the Kherson region, the Russian army stopped cars with civilians, disrupting the evacuation of people. After that, the occupiers detained the head of the city community, Volodymyr Marchuk. At the moment, the Ukrainian authorities are negotiating the release of the prisoner. We should remind that this is not the first case of kidnapping. Such incidents occur in all occupied territories. The Russian army kidnaps civil servants and public figures in order to pressure them, make them work for itself and Russian propaganda, or to get a ransom for them. Threats are sent to the relatives of these people. In Zaporozhye region, in a village of Rozovka, Russian occupants forcefully forced pensioners to gather in a hall in order to use them to hold a referendum and join the village to the Donetsk People's Republic. Russian troops are increasingly trying to strike Ukrainian railroad facilities. This way they want to disrupt the supply of weapons to the front, but instead threaten the lives of civilians, maiming and killing people. Long-range missiles are used for this purpose. One such challenge occurred at the Orlovshina station near Dnipropetrovsk region, in the aftermath of which at least 5 people were injured. Zaporozhye also came under fire. 2 Russian rockets hit the island of Hortitsa. The blast from the first missile blew out the windows of the evacuation train and several cars. The second missile damaged the sanatorium building. 8 people were injured. In Zaporozhye region, the Russian invaders used tanks, multiple rocket launchers, artillery, mortars, and heavy machine guns to shell 15 settlements. An extraordinary incident occurred in the morning of April 22nd. A Ukrainian aircraft fell in Zaporozhye region. This was reported by the Zaporozhye Regional Administration. The plane was on a technical fly and crashed at 9 o'clock near Mikhailovka. According to preliminary information, 1 person was killed and 2 injured. In the Kiev region, the driver of the truck was killed at the parking lot near Irpen as a result of landmine explosion. Unfortunately, such tragedies are happening more and more often. To this day, a large number of mines and unexploded bombs left by the Russian invaders remain in liberated territories. Because of this, the authorities ask residents to be extremely careful and not to rush back to the liberated cities. On a daily basis, sappers are actively searching for and cleaning traps. The Office of the Prosecutor General reports that since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 208 children have been killed and more than 376 have been wounded. It's worth adding that the real numbers may be much higher, because it's impossible to keep count and know the exact numbers of victims in the occupied territories. At the beginning of the war in Ukraine, up to 30% of the infrastructure was destroyed. This was reported by the Minister of the Infrastructure of Ukraine, Alexander Kubrakov. It will take about $100 billion to rebuild it. It's about more than 8,000 kilometers of roads and 300 bridges. Their restoration will take about 2 years, said the minister. According to the World Bank, the war in Ukraine has caused a decline in world economic growth. The World Bank has lowered its forecast for global economic growth in 2022 because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine from 4.1 to 3.2%. According to experts, the war started by Russia will cause more economic damage to Eastern Europe as a whole than the coronavirus pandemic. The sinking of cruiser Moskva in the Black Sea now belongs to Ukraine. According to all international conventions, the ship becomes the property of the country in whose waters it sank. The Moskva lies just 50 miles from the Ukrainian coast. Scientists are already planning an expedition to the sunken pride of the Russian fleet. Meanwhile, in the Russian city of Tver, there was a fire at the Aerospace Defense Research Institute. This war institute was involved in the development of Iskander missiles, which the Russian army used to bombard Ukrainian cities. As a result of the fire, 27 people were injured and 6 died. The causes of the fire are unknown, but a case of fire safety violation was initiated. One of the causes of the fire could have been an electrical emergency in an old building. The EU may impose an embargo on oil imports from Russia in the coming weeks. This was announced by the head of the Ministry of Finance of France, Bruno Le Maire. Despite this imposition, Germany, Austria and Hungary continue to oppose the embargo, while Poland and France are in full support of the embargo. So Emmanuel Macron says that Europe depends on Russian gas, but France doesn't need it.